The little girl's hand was still warm when Nora Callahan pulled her from the water. That was the detail that stayed with her afterward. Not the cold of Lake Tahoe in October, which had hit her like a wall of glass. Not the weight of the child's soaked dress dragging them both down. Not the screaming from the dock, or the sound of men shouting in languages she didn't understand. Just the warmth. How a 6-year-old could be that warm in 40-degree water, Nora never understood. But she held on to it. She held on to that warmth the entire way to the surface. She didn't know whose child it was. She didn't know she was about to drown in a different way entirely. Nora had been working the Aldercrest Resort for 11 months, not long enough to feel permanent, long enough to stop feeling like a guest. The resort sat on the north shore of Lake Tahoe, perched on a cliffside like something out of a brochure. Pine trees and granite and water so blue it looked photoshopped. The guests who came here didn't worry about things like rent or whether the pharmacy would fill their prescription on credit. They brought Louis Vuitton luggage and left it for someone else to carry. Nora carried it. She was 26. Her official title was Guest Services Coordinator, which sounded more dignified than what it actually meant, which was, do whatever needs doing and do it without being noticed. She was good at the invisible part. She'd been practicing her whole life. Her younger sister Blythe was 22 and recently diagnosed with lupus, the kind that hit your kidneys. Their mother had died 3 years ago. Their father had been gone long before that. It was just the two of them. It had always been just the two of them, and now Blythe was on a waiting list for a specialist in San Francisco who charged $1,000 a consultation, and Nora was working doubles and picking up weekend shifts and pretending she wasn't exhausted all the time. She sent money home every Friday. It was the first thing she did when her paycheck hit. Not the rent, not her own groceries. Blythe first. Always Blythe first. That October evening, the resort was hosting a private event. Not a gala exactly. More like what happened when very powerful people wanted to be around other very powerful people without the press watching. The guest list had come through the general manager's office sealed in an envelope, which meant no one was supposed to talk about it. Nora had overheard enough to understand the shape of it. Old money. New money. The kind of money that hired its own security and swept the event space for devices before the guests arrived. She'd been assigned to the terrace level, refilling water glasses and staying out of sight. The man had arrived just after 8. She noticed him the way she noticed storms. Not with her eyes first, but with the back of her neck. The energy in the room shifted. The noise dropped half a register. Even the water seemed to go still. His name was Stellan Voss. She would learn that later. What she noticed first was that he walked like someone who had never once considered the possibility of being stopped. He wore a dark charcoal suit that had clearly never seen the inside of a department store, and he moved through the crowd the way water moves through cracks, finding every opening, filling it. He was tall. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been through something. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, a scar at the left temple that was old enough to be silver, and beside him, half hidden behind his arm, was a little girl. She was small for her age, 6, maybe 7. She wore a navy dress and white shoes, and she was holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. Her eyes were everywhere at once, overwhelmed by the room, and her father's hand rested on her shoulder with the weight of someone who thought protection was the same as control. Nora watched the man scan the room the way a soldier would. Exits, windows, unfamiliar faces. He was doing a security sweep with his own eyes. He loves her, Nora thought. He just doesn't know how to show it in a way she can feel. The girl's name was Petra. She would learn that later too. The event stretched on. The speeches happened. The toasts happened. Nora moved through the crowd the way she always did, efficiently, invisibly, never making eye contact long enough to be seen as a person. She was filling glasses near the far end of the terrace when the child appeared at her elbow. "My rabbit fell," the little girl whispered. Nora looked down. The stuffed rabbit was nowhere in sight. She glanced toward the table where the man was deep in conversation with 2 other men in expensive suits, his back turned. "Okay," Nora said quietly, crouching down. "Where were you when you last had him? By the railing." The girl pointed toward the far edge of the terrace, overlooking the lake. "Let's go find him." They walked together toward the railing, and Nora spotted the rabbit on the ground near the bottom rail, wedged between a planter and the stone balustrade. She crouched to retrieve it, shaking off the pine needles, and handed it back. The girl took it with both hands, cradling it. "He doesn't like when I put him down. He doesn't have to be scared," Nora said. "You're right here." The girl looked at her. Something in her expression went careful and old. "My mom used to say that." Before Nora could respond, she heard it. Not a sound so much as an absence of sound, the terrace going briefly silent in a way that made the hairs on her arms rise. Then a scream from someone near the water stairs. Then another. Then glass breaking, and the sharp, flat crack of a gunshot, and the crowd surging backward in the way crowds do when something animal in them understands before their minds do. Nora didn't process the order of events until later. What happened in the moment was purely instinct. The girl was beside the railing. The railing was at the edge of a 12-foot terrace above the lake access dock. The surge of the crowd was moving toward the railing, not away from it, and the child was directly in the path of it. Someone hit the planter beside them. The stone wobbled. The girl's foot slipped on the wet stone, and then she was falling. Not onto the terrace, but over the railing into the black water below. Nora was already moving. She didn't think about the drop. She didn't think about her uniform or her shoes or the fact that Lake Tahoe in October was cold enough to stop a heart. She went over the railing after the child. The water hit her like a door slamming shut. Cold, immediate, total. She went under, and the dark was complete, and she couldn't tell which direction was up, except for the faint green light from the dock above. She kicked toward it. Her lungs started their first quiet alarm. She found the girl by touch, one small hand, then the dress, then the weight of her, and she pulled. They broke the surface together. The girl gasped. Nora gasped. The dock was 6 feet away. She got the child there. Someone leaned down to pull her up. Nora got her hands onto the dock edge and couldn't make them work. Her arms had gone wrong. Hypothermia starts fast in water that cold. She understood this abstractly, the way you understand things that are happening to someone else. She was still holding onto the dock when he got there. She didn't see him coming. She only felt the grip, hands closing around her forearms, iron strong, dragging her out of the water with an urgency that left no room for argument. She came up over the dock's edge and landed on her hands and knees on the wooden planks, coughing, and then a voice cut through everything. "Petra." Not a shout. Something worse than a shout. "Petra, look at me." The girl was already wrapped in a jacket someone had thrown over her. She was crying, but she was breathing, and when she saw her father, she reached for him and he was already there. Nora sat back on her heels on the wet dock. The resort security was shouting. Someone had a radio. Someone was on a phone. The crowd on the terrace above was pressed against the railing, faces pale in the lights. Stellan Voss looked up from his daughter. He looked at Nora the way you look at something you cannot immediately categorize. She was soaking wet, kneeling on the dock, her uniform ruined. The cold had gone into her bones. She was shaking so hard her teeth had started chattering and she couldn't make them stop. "You went in after her," he said. "It wasn't a question." "She was falling," Nora said, as if that was explanation enough. Something shifted in his face that she couldn't name. "Your name," he said. "Nora Callahan." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked at the men surrounding him. Security, by the look of them, 3 of them already on the dock and 2 more at the top of the water stairs. He said something to the one closest to him, low and brief, and the man pulled out a phone. "You're hypothermic," Stellan Voss said to Nora. "You need a hospital." "I need dry clothes," she said. "You're getting both," she wanted to argue. Her body had stopped cooperating with arguments. She was still shaking when someone draped a foil emergency blanket around her shoulders and a paramedic arrived with a bag. She kept watching Petra, small and wrapped in her father's jacket, a rabbit with one ear clutched against her chest. The girl caught Nora's eye over her father's shoulder. She mouthed something. It looked like "thank you." The hospital was in Incline Village. She was there for 4 hours, 2 under warming protocols, 2 waiting to be discharged, during which time she was informed that her core temperature had been low enough on arrival to be concerning, and that she was lucky it hadn't been worse. She knew she was lucky. She also knew she'd missed half her shift and probably her job. She was sitting in the discharge bay in a hospital gown and a borrowed sweatshirt when the door opened, and a man walked in who was not a doctor. He was one of Stellan Voss's security detail. She recognized the suit cut. "Mr. Voss would like a word," the man said. "Mr. Voss can wait until I have pants on," Nora said. A pause, then, "I'll let him know." He actually waited. 20 minutes, until she was dressed in the clothes someone had brought. Not her own clothes, but clean ones, her size, which was unsettling in a precise kind of way. Then she was walked, not unkindly, to a private room at the end of the hall, where Stellan Voss was standing at the window with a coffee cup and the expression of a man who had been thinking very hard about something for a while. Petra was asleep on the narrow couch against the wall. Someone had found her a blanket. The rabbit was tucked under her chin. Nora stopped in the doorway. "She's okay?" she asked, forgetting to frame it as something other than the first thing she needed to know. Stellan looked at the girl. "Mild exposure. She'll be fine." He turned to face Nora. "Because of you." "She fell," Nora said. "Anybody would have. They didn't." His voice was flat, not unkind. "My 3 security personnel were on the terrace. They saw it happen. You were the only one who moved." Nora didn't have an answer for that. He crossed the room and pulled out a chair at the small table, gesturing for her to sit. She did, because she was still tired in a way that went past physical. He sat across from her. "Tell me about yourself," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry? You work at Aldercrest. How long? 11 months. Hospitality jobs. Reno? Mostly. 1 year in Vegas." She studied him. "Why does it matter? I've been trying to work out." Stellenvoss said slowly. "What I owe me, anything, my daughter is alive because of you." He said it the way he'd said it outside. Not as gratitude exactly, but as a fact he was trying to build something from. In my experience, that creates an obligation. I don't want an obligation. I want to go home and sleep. Where is home? She gave him a look. He held it without flinching. "A 1-bedroom in Incline Village," she said. "I share it with a lot of bills." Something moved across his expression. Not pity, she would have gotten up if it was pity. Something more like recognition. "You have family?" The question landed differently than he probably meant it. Of the voicemail she hadn't listened to yet, the one from the specialist's office about the rescheduled consultation, the one that had come in while she was underwater. "A sister," she said. "She's sick." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does she need? A lot of things I can't afford." It was more than she'd meant to say to a stranger. She didn't know why she'd said it at all. He had that quality, not warmth, exactly, but a kind of absolute stillness that made the space around him feel like somewhere confessions went. "I'm not a good man," Stellenvoss said. "I want you to know that before anything else. I'm not going to pretend to be one." She looked at him. "I run a private equity firm," he continued. "That's the official version. The actual version is more complicated and involves people and industries that operate outside the places most people choose to look." He said it without apology, without the kind of performance she'd seen in men who wanted to seem dangerous. He just stated it. "My daughter has been targeted twice in the past year. Her mother is gone. I have enemies, and those enemies have shown a willingness to use the people closest to me." Nora held very still. "The man who fired that shot tonight was not after me," Stellan said. "He was after her. They know that she is the way to reach me." The room felt smaller suddenly. "There was a camera crew at the event," he continued. "Not press, one of my rivals. The footage of you going into the water after her is already circulating in certain circles. You have been identified. You are, as of tonight, a person who matters to my daughter." Which Nora thought of her apartment, of Blythe's Tuesday medication schedule, of the drive home in the dark alone. "What are you saying?" she said. "I'm saying you have 2 options." He folded his hands on the table. "You go back to your life, and within 72 hours someone with a great deal of motivation will make an approach. That approach will not be friendly." His voice didn't waver. "Or you come with me. You stay close to Petra, which is what she needs anyway. She's been through 2 therapists and she doesn't speak to either of them. She spoke to you. I saw it from 30 feet away. I'm not a therapist, I know. I'm not a nanny either. I know what you are," he said. "You're someone who went over a railing for a child she'd known for 4 minutes." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like you to stay alive. And I'd like Petra to have someone in her life who treats her like a child instead of a complication." The silence stretched. "My sister," Nora said. "Tell me what she needs." So she did. She told him about the lupus, about the kidney inflammation, about the specialist in San Francisco, about the medication costs, and the way Blythe had stopped, calling her to complain because she could tell Nora was already at the edge of what she could carry. She told him all of it, and she wasn't sure why, except that she was cold and tired, and the girl with the rabbit was asleep 6 feet away, and something about this room had made the usual walls hard to maintain. Stellenvoss listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "She'll have a specialist by Monday, full coverage. I have a medical team in San Francisco that handles private patients. She'll see someone senior, not a fellow." Nora stared at him. "This is not a bribe," he said. "Consider it a debt I'm already starting to repay. What I'm asking you for, your presence and your protection of my daughter, is separate. And if I say no to the second part, the sister's care doesn't change. That's done regardless. She didn't know what to do with that. Men like this didn't give things away without strings. Every instinct she'd developed working rooms full of wealthy people told her that. And yet the sleeping child across the room had said her rabbit was scared of the dark. "What exactly would this arrangement look like?" Nora asked. "You would live in my house in San Francisco. You would spend time with Petra, structured time, meals, whatever she asks for. You would not be a servant. You would have your own rooms, your own schedule, aside from the hours you're with her." He paused. "I would be honest with you about the risks, and there are real ones. And in return, your sister would have everything she needs for as long as this arrangement continues." "As long as it continues," Nora repeated. "And when it ends, the medical coverage continues for 5 years regardless." That is not conditional. She should have thought longer. She knew that she should have asked for time, for lawyers, for something in writing. But she thought of Blythe's last blood work results, of the number the specialist's office had quoted her, of the way Blythe had said it's okay. "Nor, I'll figure it out," which was what Blythe always said when she was trying to protect Nora from something that couldn't be fixed. "I want it in writing," Nora said. "Done. I want to call my sister before I agree to anything. There's a phone on the table. I want to be able to leave if I decide this is wrong." Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "You can always leave. I'm not in the business of keeping people who don't want to be kept." Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached for the phone. The house in San Francisco was not a house. It was a building. 6 floors in Pacific Heights, limestone and glass, and a rooftop terrace that looked out over the bay. The interior was all high ceilings and clean angles and the kind of silence that only exists when the walls are thick and the windows are triple-paned. It was expensive and immaculate, and completely, suffocatingly without warmth. Nora stood in the entryway on her first morning and thought, "Nobody lives here. They occupy it." Petra's room was on the 3rd floor. It had every toy a child could want, and the feeling of a room that had been professionally staged. The books were alphabetized. The stuffed animals were arranged by height. The only evidence of actual human habitation was the rabbit with the missing ear sitting on the pillow. "I put him there," Petra said from behind her. Nora turned. The girl was in the doorway in pajamas, watching her. She was better rested than she'd been at the hospital. Her hair was a dark tangle and she had her father's eyes, cautious, measuring older than 6 years should have made them. "Does he have a name?" Nora asked, nodding at the rabbit. "Captain, good name. He's been with me since before my mum died." Petra came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, picking up the rabbit without looking at it. "Dad doesn't like talking about her." Nora sat on the window seat. What was she like? Petra looked up sharply. Like she hadn't expected the question. "She laughed a lot," she said after a moment. "She was loud. Dad is never loud." "No," Nora agreed. "He's really not." Something unlocked in the girl's expression. Like a door that had been leaned shut for a long time and was finally letting the light show around its edges. The weeks that followed were not easy, and were not simple and looked nothing like the smooth transition Nora might have imagined if she'd been imagining anything, which she hadn't had time for. Stellan Voss was absent during the days, present at night, and the 2 states felt like different weather systems. During the days the house belonged to her and Petra and the security staff and a housekeeper named Agnes, who had been there for 12 years, and said almost nothing but made extraordinary soup. During the evening Stellan came home, and the house rearranged itself around him without anyone deciding to do it. Nora watched the way Petra watched her father. The girl was starving for something and didn't have the language for what it was. She would appear in doorways when he was home, hovering, waiting to be invited in. He didn't ignore her. He wasn't cruel, but he spoke to her like he was reading from a script for a role he'd never fully learned. One night, about 3 weeks in, Nora was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea when Stellan came in at 10:30. He looked like he'd been fighting something, not with his body but with the parts of himself that don't show. He saw her and stopped. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't think anyone was still up." "Agnes left soup," she said. "There's enough." He stood there for a moment in that way he had, where you could almost watch him decide something. Then he came and sat down at the kitchen island and she got up and found a bowl. They ate in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. That surprised her. "Petra drew something today," Nora said. "She wanted to show you, but you weren't home." He looked up. "She drew a picture of the lake. You, her, and a figure she said was me." She paused. "She put all 3 of us in a boat." He put his spoon down slowly. "She's trying to tell you something," Nora said, keeping her voice neutral. "She's been trying to tell you for a long time. She just doesn't think you're listening. I'm always listening. I don't think she knows that." He was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen hummed around them, refrigerator and clock and the far sound of the city. "Her mother died, because someone meant it for me, a car that wasn't supposed to be on that road. I had been warned. I moved my meetings. I moved everything. I moved everything except Elena." His voice was flat in the way voices go flat when they've been saying something for years inside someone's head. "Petra was with the nanny that morning, if she hadn't been." He stopped. Nora didn't fill the silence. Some silences needed the room. "I look at her," Stellan said, "and I know that I am the reason she doesn't have a mother. And I don't know how to be the father she deserves when I am also the reason she lost what she needed most." He looked at his hands. "I make her hard because I am terrified of what softness costs." "You're not making her hard," Nora said. "You're making her lonely." He looked at her then, really looked at her in the way he almost never did. Without the calculation, without the professional assessment, just a man looking at a person who had said something true. I know, he said quietly. The night it happened, Petra had been having a good week. That was the cruelty of it. They had gone to the farmer's market on Saturday morning, the three of them, which had not been planned and had come about because Petra had stood in the kitchen at 7:30 and said, "Dad, can we go somewhere?" And Stellan had looked at Nora, and Nora had said, "Farmer's market. It's close," and somehow that was the whole conversation. They'd walked through the stalls and Petra had picked out a bunch of sunflowers, and Stellan had carried them without being asked, his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and it had looked, to anyone passing by, like a family. Monday, Stellan had a meeting downtown. He took his security detail. The remaining 2 men were at the house. Nora was in the garden with Petra when her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the security system, a door sensor, the side entrance, flagged as unusual. She looked at the screen. It showed a brief gap in the camera feed. 10 seconds of nothing. Her stomach dropped. Petra. She kept her voice even. "Let's go inside." She got the girl into the house and into the kitchen and was reaching for her phone to call Stellan's security lead when she heard the sound from the front hall. Not a crash, not a shout. Just a door that opened the way doors open when someone who knows what they're doing wants to be quiet. The 2 security men were at the front of the house. The man who came through the side entrance had bypassed them entirely. Nora was between the kitchen doorway and Petra when he appeared. He was nobody. That was the first thought, which was the most frightening thought. He looked like a person. He was holding something that he raised when he saw them. Nora stepped in front of Petra. She didn't calculate it. She didn't think Stellan's name or Blythe's or any grand noble thought. She just moved, her body between the man and the child, her arms spread out in a way that was useless and instinctive and human. The security team came from behind her. She didn't register the next 8 seconds except as noise and movement and then sudden, ringing stillness. Someone was saying her name. She was on the floor. She didn't know when she'd sat down. Petra had her arms around her from behind, which was backwards, which meant somehow the child was the one holding her. Nora. Stellan was crouching in front of her. He had come from somewhere. She didn't know when he'd arrived. His tie was loose and his face was stripped entirely of the careful professional surface he usually wore. "Nora, are you hit?" She ran a quick inventory. Nothing was on fire. "No," she said. "I don't think so." His hands were on her face, which was startling. Checking her eyes, her pulse point, his hands were not steady. "He missed," she said, understanding it belatedly. He was disarmed before he fired," Stellan said. "My team got to him." She let out a breath. Petra tightened her arms. The man was gone, taken somewhere, by someone. The kitchen looked like a kitchen again, except for the side door hanging open. A security team member was closing it and talking into a radio. Stellan sat back on his heels, looking at her. The something in his face was different from anything she'd seen there before. It wasn't gratitude. It was older and rawer than that. "You stepped in front of her," he said. "Yes, you did that at the lake too." "I know." "Why?" he asked. And she understood he meant it genuinely, the same way he'd asked the first time, as if the answer might be something he didn't have in his existing vocabulary. "Because she was there," Nora said, "and I was there. And someone had to." He was quiet for a long time. Around them, the house resumed its careful operations. Security moving through rooms, someone on a phone, Agnes appearing in the doorway with the specific expression of a woman who had weathered difficult things before and intended to weather them again. "I need to end this," Stellan said. He said it to himself as much as to her. "This cannot be the life she grows up in." "Then end it," Nora said. "It's not that simple." "I know it's not simple." "I didn't say simple," I said. "End it." She met his eyes. "She drew you in a boat with her. She's not afraid of you. She's afraid of losing you. Those are different things, and if you can see the difference, you can work with it." He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. "Come with me to Chicago," he said. "What's in Chicago?" "The man who sent this one tonight." His voice was perfectly level. "I know who he is. I've known for 6 weeks. I've been building the case through channels that take time. Tonight moves the timeline. You want me to come because of Petra. I want you to come because Petra needs you there." A pause. "And because I am aware that when I said you were safe here, I was wrong, and you paid for that and I don't." He stopped. A muscle worked in his jaw. "I don't leave debts unpaid." Nora looked at him. At the hands that weren't steady. At the man underneath the construction of the man. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, like the word surprised him. The event in Chicago was a private dinner. The kind of dinner where the guest list was also a map of power structures. And what you did with your fork and where you sat and who you spoke to first all meant something in a language Nora had never learned and was learning fast. Stellan dressed her for it, not as a servant, not as staff, but as someone who belonged at the table. She wore deep green silk. He had again known her size. Stop trying to figure out how I know that, he said, watching her look at the label. I pay people who are very good at what they do. It's unsettling, most things about me are. Petra had been left in the suite upstairs with Agnes, whom Petra had decided she liked, largely because Agnes also liked Captain, and had knitted him a small winter coat without being asked. Downstairs, the dinner was everything Nora had been braced for, and also somehow sharper in person. Men with wives who watched everything from behind the performance of watching nothing. Courses arriving like diplomatic exchanges, conversations that meant 3 different things depending on which register you read them in. She sat beside Stellan. She listened. She was better at listening than most people in this room had ever needed to be. She spotted it midway through the 3rd course. The man across the table, heavy-jawed, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that came from never having been genuinely told no, wore a ring. A signet ring, old gold with an engraved design she'd seen before. She'd seen it 6 weeks ago in a photograph Stellan's security chief had shown her briefly while explaining the threat profile. It was the crest of a private partnership, not public knowledge, the kind of thing that wouldn't mean anything to a room full of people who weren't looking for it. She was looking for it. She turned to Stellan and said, very quietly, under the cover of the conversation across the table, the man in the grey suit, the ring on his right hand. Stellan didn't move, didn't look, gave nothing to the room. But under the table, his hand found hers and pressed once, briefly. Not a romantic gesture. Something more like recognition. Like, I see you. Like, I know. Keep talking, he murmured. That's something I say. She smiled. He said something low that she didn't fully catch. She laughed as if she had. Around the table, the conversation continued. 15 minutes later, the man in the grey suit excused himself and was met in the hallway by 3 people who were not, it turned out, dinner guests. Later, in the suite, Petra was asleep in the bedroom. Agnes had gone to her own room. Nora was sitting in the small living area in her silk dress and bare feet, the city of Chicago a spread of cold light outside the window, thinking about nothing in particular except that her feet hurt and that she was tired, and that the thing she'd expected to feel, fear maybe, or relief, wasn't quite either. Stellan came in and loosened his tie and looked at her from across the room. It's done, he said. The commission agreed. He violated the terms. A pause. He won't be a problem, she nodded. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. He looked like he did in the kitchen those nights, when the professional surface had worn through and there was just the man. I told you I wasn't a good man, he said. You did. I'm not going to pretend the last few months have changed that in any meaningful structural sense. I'm not asking you to. But, he stopped, looked at his hands the way he had in the kitchen weeks ago. Petra slept through the night without waking 3 nights last week. Agnes mentioned it to me this morning, like she was reporting something surprising. It's apparently been nearly a year since that happened regularly. He looked up. That's you. That's Petra, Nora said. She was ready to feel safe. She just needed something to hold on to. She's holding on to you, I know. So am I, he said. Whether I had the sense to admit it or not, Nora looked at him. At the room, at the window and the lights. She thought about the lake and the warmth of the girl's hand underwater. She thought about what she'd been doing before that. The tips she counted on Fridays, the calls she made to Blythe, the way she moved through rooms full of people who never saw her, invisible, efficient, gone as soon as the glass was full. She wasn't invisible in this room. I'm not easy to be around, Stellan said. I'm no, she agreed, but I've been around easy, and it didn't get Blythe's treatment paid for. It didn't get Captain a winter coat. It didn't. She stopped. Easy isn't actually what I was looking for. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. What were you looking for? She looked at him for a long moment. Something real, she said. He got up and came across the room and sat beside her. Not across from her. He was warm the way the child had been warm in the water, inexplicably, reliably, in ways she hadn't expected. He didn't reach for her hand. He just sat beside her and the city moved outside the window and she let herself stay. I need to be better, he said quietly. Not to her, but not to himself either. For her. I know what I've been doing and I know what it costs her. Then be better, Nora said. She's not keeping score. She's just waiting. He turned and looked at her, close now, his face without the layers. Don't go, he said. Not a command. Something entirely different from a command. A request, from someone who didn't often make them. Nora looked at the door to the bedroom, where Petra was sleeping with Captain tucked under her chin. I'm not going anywhere, she said. When Petra woke the next morning, she found both of them already in the little kitchen of the suite. Stellan was making coffee, badly, and Nora was making eggs, competently, and they were arguing in a low way about whether the coffee-to-water ratio mattered, which apparently it did to one of them very much. Petra stood in the doorway for a minute before either of them noticed her. When they did, Both of them stopped and looked at her. She walked to the small table and climbed into a chair and pulled Captain onto her lap. "Are we going home today?" she asked. Stellan looked at Nora. "Yes," he said, "we're going home." Petra nodded, satisfied, and reached for a piece of toast. Outside, the Chicago morning came in grey and cold through the windows, but the kitchen was warm, and something that had been held in suspension for a long time. In the man, in the girl, in the particular quiet that Nora had been carrying since the moment she went over a railing into dark water, settled gently into place. She wasn't the girl who refilled glasses anymore. She was someone who had been seen. Someone who had been chosen, not for what she could do for someone else's world, but for what she was when no one was watching. The person who jumped. And that, as it turned out, was exactly enough.